We're going to be in the book of Ruth today, and we're going to cover the entire book in our class time together today. And then next week we move back to the New Testament. We will be in the book of Hebrews. Let's go through our reading review questions. Question number 1. Who was Elimelech's wife? Naomi. What happened to the husbands of Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth? They all died in the country of Moab. They died. Why did Naomi tell the women in Bethlehem to call her Mara? Right. Right. She lost her husband. She lost both of her sons. And the word Mara means bitter. And so she wanted them, instead of Naomi, which I didn't write down, I can't remember what it means off the top of my head, but she wanted them to call her Mara instead, which means bitter, because the Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. All right, number 4. Moving into chapter 2. In whose field did Ruth glean after the reapers? Boaz. Number 5. What did Boaz instruct his young men concerning Ruth's gleaning? Right. Let her alone. Let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not reproach her. And let grain fall from the bundles. Let it fall purposely for her, that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. He wanted to take care of her. All right, moving into chapter 3, number 6. What did Naomi tell Ruth to do at the threshing floor? Right. Go in wherever he's lying down, uncover his feet, and lay down. All right. Number 7. What was the obstacle that could have prevented Boaz from performing the duty of a close relative? Right. There was a relative closer than Boaz. And so that was an obstacle. That's something that they had to work around. All right, and then chapter 4, why did the other close relatives say he could not redeem the land for himself? Yeah, in some way, in his mind, it would ruin his inheritance. And so he chose not to go through with that. All right, number 9, what was the custom concerning redeeming and exchanging? Yeah. My understanding is this actually happened. It's not just a figure of speech. He took off his sandal, gave it to the other man. And that was just kind of the sign of the contract, the agreement being made. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he had an extra pair in his backpack. Number 10. How were Boaz and Ruth related to David? Okay. I've got great-grandparents of David, right? Because Ruth, they were the parents of Obed, who was the parent of Jesse. So they were the grandparents of Jesse, David's father. So that makes them the great-grandparents of David. Okay. Let's move to the back page now. The discussion questions. Yes. Uh-huh.
I was wondering if one of the reasons that we were all married and couldn't redeem her was because she was
That could have been a part of it.
somebody from another language, another
Yeah.
religion.
That could have been a part of it. We're well aware of how the Jews felt about non-Jews. And so it could be that he was using that as an excuse. I don't want to have anything to do with her. But he used the inheritance as his excuse instead of saying, instead of calling her out, just saying, I don't want to mess up my own inheritance and my kids and all that. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. Okay. All right, any other questions on the reading section? All right, discussion. Question number 1. Discuss the commitment that Ruth lovingly made to Naomi and to her God. In Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, there it says, entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. What are some of the signs of commitment or types of love that you see in this?
Ruth had a loving loyalty to Naomi. She didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
She was willing to put her beliefs aside to be part of Naomi's religion. She would have also made a wrong confession of faith and devotion to God.
Yeah. You see a loyalty on the part of Ruth. Naomi must have had quite an impact on her for her to say these things. What was the status of a woman at this time who lost her husband and lost her sons? She was destined to be a beggar, wasn't she? She had nobody to provide for her, but Ruth said, I'm staying with you. Naomi must have had quite an impact on her, a godly influence for Ruth to make that decision, to leave behind her homeland and to go where she is going to be a foreigner, and to leave behind whatever pagan gods were in Moab at that time, and to follow the God of Naomi. And so, I think the example that Naomi set for her must have had a major influence on her. What else do you have? Sacrificial love. When we look at agape in the New Testament, that's one of the outstanding characteristics of it. It's sacrifice. You're going to do whatever you can do to see to the needs of another person, seeking the very highest of another person. And that's the agape, that's the love God has for us, that's the love we are to have for our brethren. That's right.
It was a steadfast warrior that goes beyond family acquaintances, real deep warrior in those who surround themselves.
Yeah. Deep loyalty.
That's the way Christians should live. That's the way we should be.
Right.
We should be loyal to our faith. We should be loyal to our brothers and sisters in Christ. We should do those things that are pleasing to God.
Absolutely. We should be loyal to our faith, loyal to our brothers and sisters in Christ, and do what is pleasing to God. And that's what Ruth shows here. We often hear these words read at a wedding during the ceremony. And it's certainly appropriate. This is the type of relationship a husband and wife should have for one another. This level of loyalty and commitment. But it's not romantic love that is expressed here. It is, as Barbara said, sacrificial love, demonstrated by commitment. And that's the basis for any godly relationship. Whether you're talking about husband and wife or brother and sister in Christ, that's the type of foundation we need. These words come from the heart of a Moabite, a foreigner. She had come under the influence of God because of her mother-in-law, and that led her to make a decision that would control her the rest of her life. We're often too distracted by circumstances. We don't think about the long-term effects of our commitments. We must soberly consider the ramifications and the consequences of the decisions we make. Where we work, where we worship, where we live, these decisions do not exist in a vacuum. They affect everything. They affect our relationship to our families. They affect our relationships to the church. They affect our relationship with God Himself. So we need to consider them very carefully. Ruth's decision was based upon her love for Naomi and for God. And in this example, we see love at its very best. Think about the confident love. She had utmost confidence in God, probably because of what she saw in Naomi's life. So she had confidence in her mother-in-law and in God. It was a clinging love. She clung to Naomi and to God. She would not turn loose. It was a caring love. Ruth cared for Naomi. And we'll talk more about that in a moment, how she cared for her. It was a love of concern. She knew that Naomi needed her, and she was going to be there to do whatever she could to help her. It was a continuing love. Not something sporadic, not something that was temporary, not something that was, when I feel like it. This was something that Ruth was dedicated. Again, this goes back to the loyalty, the commitment. It was convicting. We see Orpah's love for Naomi was more of an emotional kind. She cried when she left. She was upset that she wasn't going to see her again. But Ruth's love was based upon a conviction, and that's the kind of love that we need. It was a compassionate love for this woman who was a widow. Ruth knew that there was somebody that needed someone to help, to see after her. And Ruth, I'm guessing, was at least still able-bodied. I don't know how young she was at this point, but she was still able-bodied enough that she could help in this situation. And it was a love that was determined. There was no reason for it, no place for it to stop. She knew that she loved her mother-in-law, and she was going to do whatever she could to help. So let's turn the light on us as we consider these things. Do we demonstrate this type of love to our families, physical families, our spiritual family? Are we looking for opportunities to serve, ways to make other people smile? Or are we looking for faults and shortcomings? We will find what we're looking for. We will find problems if that's what we're looking for. We need to have an optimistic outlook. We need to look for the good. We need to love our family like Ruth loved Naomi. We need to love God like Ruth loved God. Any other comments, questions on number 1? All right, number 2. What can we learn from Ruth and Naomi's relationship? As demonstrated in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2, Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, Go, my daughter. What can we learn about their relationship here?
Ruth desired to help provide food for Naomi and her. Now, taking that chance to glean grain and live in Boaz's field. But Ruth did it the right way. She first asked Naomi
Yeah.
for permission, and then she asked the overseer, Boaz's overseer, not knowing when Boaz had already set the stage on this. She did it the right way. So then she still took a huge chance because, not knowing all this, she was a foreigner. And these, by leaving the chorus of the field, based on God's command, that was mainly for the poor of Israel, not the foreigner.
Yeah, that's right. She showed a level of respect for Naomi, first of all, by going to her and saying, here's an opportunity, please let me do this for you. Right? So she showed, doesn't sound right, courtesy. She was determined to help in whatever way she could, and she did it the right way. She went and sought permission. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you see this relationship, those last three words in verse 2. Go, my daughter. She had taken Ruth into her family. Even though her son had died, Ruth's husband had died, she still saw Ruth as her daughter. And so there's a level of commitment and dedication and love there on both sides. We talk about Ruth a lot, but we see it in Naomi too. Very little that we see of Naomi, but we see that love in her life as well. Yeah. The courtesy that's manifested on the part of Ruth. Mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law would do well to read this book and look at the principles that make for a good relationship. Be courteous. That's a command. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8. Are any commands of God optional? The book says be courteous. We have to be courteous. We see this also when Boaz tells her that she can glean in his field. You know, how we treat other people speaks volumes. The courtesy that we show to others is so very important, especially in the family dynamic or the in-law dynamic. Ruth and Naomi, they have no legal obligations to one another after their husbands have died. But they had developed this bond and they showed kindness to each other throughout their difficult situations. Ruth loved her mother-in-law. Naomi loved her daughter-in-law. And in that last part of that verse again, go my daughter. She doesn't call her by name, but she identifies her by a relationship that's even deeper than the name. Daughter. Ruth was thinking about others. She was thinking about Naomi. The second principle involved in good human relations and especially family relations is that concern, taking care of one another. Naomi had no means by which she could take care of Ruth. So Ruth took care of Naomi. She cared deeply for her mother-in-law. She wanted to be sure that she had what she needed. And she was willing to get out and work at a lowly task. And that's good. As long as it's honorable, it's good to work. And there's humility in this. When you see somebody gleaning behind the reapers, you could say there's an indication of poverty. There was nothing dishonorable in what she did, though. There's nothing dishonorable in going along and picking up the grain that was left behind, because the Bible told the people of God to leave this grain for the poor. Ruth was not too proud to take her place among those other folks who needed this help. How many things do we shrink from that are good and noble and right? And they may need to be done, but we're not going to do it. We're too good for that. We need to be careful with that kind of an attitude. There are so many things that we could do and doors that are open. Give us opportunities to meet needs, and yet often we're hesitant to do anything about it because of our pride, what others may think about it, what others may say about it. We ought to be ready and willing to do any task, lowly or not, as long as it's honorable. I've got up on the board here John chapter 13. Verses 1 through 17. Does anybody know off the top of your head what that references? That's when Jesus washed the disciples' feet. He was showing that he was willing to do whatever was necessary to help another person. We have to have that same attitude, that same humility to do whatever is necessary to help our brothers and sisters. Ruth was willing to do whatever was needed to meet the needs of Naomi, her family. Whatever your job may be, so long as it is not a sinful occupation, it should be done to the very best of your ability, because God has blessed you with that job. Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 and 24, whatever you do, do it heartily, as unto the Lord, and not to man, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. So whatever your job is, you do whatever your boss asks of you. And if you're able to go above and beyond that, you go above and beyond. Because ultimately you're working for Jesus and not your boss alone. Any other comments, questions on number 2? All right, number 3. How important is one's reputation? What scriptures support your answer?
A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, love and favor rather than silver or gold. Paul said in Romans 12:17, repay no one evil for evil, have a regard for good things, and decide of all men. 1 Peter 2:12, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they
Protect your reputation. Because that's how you're going to lead others to Christ. You can say all the right things, but if you're not living the way you should, nobody's going to listen to you, right? We have to be what we preach. We have to be what we claim to be. And it's more important to have that good name, that good reputation, than a bank account, right? Robin, and then Gina.
Reputation is very important because it really reveals your true character to everyone. Just some scriptures that he mentioned. Acts 6:3, there were 7 men of good reputation who were selected to serve the dumbest
Right.
And Acts 10:22, Cornelius, even though he was a Roman centurion, he feared God and he had a good reputation. We know Jesus had a good reputation. It's one that we should all emulate. Proverbs 25:10 said, warns us of ruining our reputation. And I believe one of the qualifications of an elder should be one of everyone's to have a good reputation within and outside the church.
Yeah, that's right. Gina?
So I'm just going to say this, I'm dating someone new, and he was talking about the Bush church, I'm very personal, word with my relationship. He was talking about Bush people in church doing things that, and he had some discussion, but that's not true. And he was like, yeah, because half the people leave the church and they gossip about other people, talk about it. And I completely heard it. I said, we're not ever trying to tell him. He had an issue, church and everything else. I was like, we have to think about it. And so I was telling him, I was like, well, this is my concept. A lot of people that in the church, they don't need to stay in church, they need to go outside the church. They bring those people anywhere at church anyways. So, but there's a lot of people suffering. You can praise God all day long and build it, but you need God where you are. And I said, the church is doing that. So we're supposed to talk about it, we'll talk about it, we go to church, they go home from church after the whole week now, and then they disrespect it, like Austin was talking about, etc. So I mean, the reason I'm saying is, I've put this out myself, so gossiping is just as bad as anything else in another sense. So I think it's a real, it's our job to not judge it, sit out, not judge it, for us to be there for other people and act the same as we do here outside the doors.
Yeah. And this goes back again to what we were talking about before. You're going to see what you want to see. If you're looking for faults in other people, you're going to find them. We have to be more optimistic. We have to have that positive outlook. That doesn't mean turning a blind eye to the faults, but let's be the example that others can follow to be better, to be more like God. David?
Well, we, church, are people. We are humans.
Yeah.
We are sinful. We are going to do things just like any other. Just like people outside of the body of Christ are. We're going to do the same things. We are humans, just the way it is. Now, the difference being hopefully is that we don't revel in, that type of behavior, accept that type of behavior and go along with our lives.
We commit sin, but we don't live in sin.
Right.
Exactly.
You can think about it is, we mentioned it, Christ did no wrong. Christ, his reputation, like I said, is one that we should emulate. But what was he accused of?
Right.
His healing, his miraculous works were what? They were demons.
Right.
Who is this person? Isn't he the same we know his brothers and his sisters, and isn't he the carpenter's son? You know, that type of, and that's the, you can't do anything, as you alluded to, about other people and how they want to see, how they want to view. You cannot do anything about that. All you can do is the very best you can do.
Yeah. This comes back to what Thomas was saying with the verse from 1 Peter. Let them say what they're going to say. They're going to be ashamed because they know it's a lie. You're doing the right thing, and that's all that matters before God. You live your life in such a way that God is pleased, and the people who are around, they may say the wrong thing. People who know you know that they're lying, and they know themselves that they're lying.
And you're growing. I mean, every day you should be growing. The things that you do now that you see, that you view as being, quote, in the right unquote, you may come to realize, well, wait a second, maybe not so much, and you change your perspective or the things that you do, because it comes to the realization that, okay, maybe my behavior, although I thought it was I was being righteous, or following, not so much. And so we're all growing.
We grow, yeah.
And you cannot, we're all in the same boat together. It doesn't matter. No one of us is any better than the other, regardless of what the situation is. Sin is sin.
Yeah. And we adjust our lifestyle as we learn more. Yeah.
But I mean, there is sometimes two examples, like as far as things concerned. I mean, Hebrews 10:26 says, "What we want to live in sin, after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there is no longer need to sacrifice for sins." So, and there's other verses that keep saying, we keep continuing to sin, we are not a copper of the devil. So I mean, like that, like you were saying, we live in sin. So we're not continuously sinning over. I mean, we are made of flesh, and we are going to sin, and fall short of the stuff that in the Bible. But if you say we don't sin, then you're a liar.
Yep.
So we keep sinning, we're not just continue to sin. That's our reputation is the thing. We continue to lie and sin, keep from there. We're not living life without living life.
Yeah. And going back to the reputation, that's what really matters. When we recognize the sin, we stop it, right? We don't continue doing it. Now, we see in the Bible the importance of the reputation. Robin mentioned the elders, 1 Timothy 3:2. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside. That should be 3:7. I'm sorry. 3:7. They must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into the snare of the devil. Verse 2 talks about how he must be blameless. Acts chapter 6 and verse 3, those 7 servants in the church of Jerusalem, one of their qualities was a good reputation. Paul talks about how Christians should be known by their integrity. In 1 Peter 3 verses 15 and 16, our reputation should be such that no one questions our word. If we say we will do something, they know it will be done. James chapter 5 verse 12. Above all, my brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment. We shouldn't need to promise. If we say it, it's going to get done. All right, number 4. What are some of the Israelite customs that we see observed in the book of Ruth?
Most relatives has first rights to care for Israelite woman who has no husband or sons. Israelite poor have the right to clean the corners of the crops. It's supposed to be done. I have to lie down and Boaz's feet. Ruth symbolizes those of marriage.
Okay.
And redeeming and exchanging what man takes off his sandal and gives to the other man without.
Right. Did we see any others?
What about the Levite marriage? They plan to marry the widow of his deceased brother if they have no children. Redemption, close relatives had the right and responsibility to redeem or finite family property that had been sold. And then the removing of the shoe and the gleaning.
Right. Okay, so the gleaning. Let's look at this very quickly. The poor were supported by the law of gleaning. Harvesters were told to leave some of the crop in the field for the poor, who would follow along and pick up the gleanings for themselves. This is in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 22. And we see this happening in the book of Ruth in the fields of Boaz. Second, this is a little bit confusing, so follow along. There's what is called the Levirate law, or Levirate law. This is in Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10. This is talking about brothers. That's not what we see in the book of Ruth. It's very similar, but there are some differences. This was a requirement. Had Ruth's brother had Ruth's husband had a surviving brother, it would have been not his right to marry Ruth, but his obligation to marry her. And so we see, what we see in Ruth is a kinsman redeemer situation. The closer relative had the option to decline this opportunity. That's not the case in the brothers. They didn't have the option to decline. It was considered a sin for them not to fulfill this obligation. And so Boaz was able to take advantage of this man's refusal to marry her and take her as his wife. And then we also see the court action. In Ruth chapter 4, that business was transacted at the gate of the city. The Old Testament times, this is the traditional place for legal business to be transacted. Amos chapter 5, verse 10 states that the people hated those who reprove in the gate. These are the judges who made decisions at the gate. Job, in Job 31:21, said that he had support at the gate. He was talking about legal backing. The selection of 10 men to serve as witnesses made the transaction official. These witnesses served to notarize the decision. One might wonder if this is also the precedent for the Jewish custom of having at least 10 males in order to have a synagogue later on. Exchanging the shoe to close the deal is a custom that is not mentioned elsewhere in the Old Testament. And so we have something that's interesting and unique in Ruth, but we don't see it anywhere else. All right, David.
Just a quick, in regards to the obligation of the brothers in this case. That is why in 11, Naomi says, am I going to have any more sons because of your husband?
Exactly.
Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and you gave, and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? That's exactly what she's talking about, why she said.
Right. Right. She's telling Ruth and Orpah to go back to their land and find a new husband because they could not have one by Naomi. Yeah, that's right. All right. Any other thoughts on the customs? All right. Last question. What other lessons can we learn from the book of Ruth? Very open-ended. Love, loyalty, and faith, commitment. So very important for the people of God.
We're going to have Romans, Ruth 1:16. There's a portion of them that is used in many marriages in the
Yeah.
past, I don't know so much today, you know, you pick the line, however bad, I've heard that many times.
Yeah. Yeah, that 116 talks about that level of loyalty that Ruth had for Naomi, and we hear that read at a lot of wedding ceremonies, and it certainly should represent the relationship between a husband and wife, even though that's not the context it's used in. But a husband and wife should have that type of commitment, that level of loyalty in their lives as well. Thomas?
There's another big word in there, and that's kindness. How God can work through difficult circumstances to bring about redemption and blessings. It also highlights the significance of family, friendship, and the value of even seemingly insignificant people in God's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Providence. God provides. No matter how desperate the circumstances, God blesses those who serve Him faithfully. There's a lot of good lessons that we can learn about providence throughout the Old Testament. And most of the time, Ruth is overlooked in those. But we should consider, God made this law all the way back in the days of Moses, and here we see it enacted in the life of Boaz and Ruth. It would also be a mistake to study Ruth and not see the biblical principles that enable us to overcome alienation and separation. The Moabites are alienated and separated from the Israelites, but in Ruth we see them brought together and united. As a result of our sin, our world is full of alienation. Paul talked about the Gentiles being alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, without God, without hope, in Ephesians 2:12. We see alienation in families. Here we have principles to overcome and conquer alienation. Respect for Scripture. Boaz was careful to abide by what the Scripture taught in relationship to being a nearer kinsman. Thoughtfulness. You can't read Ruth without being impressed with her thoughtfulness for Naomi and Naomi's thoughtfulness for Ruth, and Boaz's thoughtfulness for both, and especially for Ruth. Thoughtfulness on all three aspects helped them to overcome that alienation that Ruth might have felt otherwise. We see industry, how willing Ruth was to work. Laziness and carelessness cannot in any way help us to overcome alienation. It increases it. If Ruth had come with Naomi and just been a leech and gone around looking for a handout, she would have made no contribution that would have done anything for them. How does she gain respect from people? She didn't expect it to be one-sided, did she? She makes her contribution toward causing the people of Israel to respect her. They saw how she treated Naomi, and that led to a level of respect. We see kindness, as Brother Thomas mentioned, all throughout the book. We can see that spirit of kindness. Liberality, how much Boaz was willing to let her have. Lowliness, humility, self-denial, mutual respect, being teachable. She was a foreigner in the land. She needed to be taught the customs, and she was willing to receive those lessons. There's many, many lessons that we see in the book of Ruth that help us to overcome alienation from each other and from God. All right, next week we're going to move on to the book of Hebrews. If you did not get a paper, they are up here on the front pew.